Hello everyone, I'm Marty and welcome to my September 2024 market update. I just got back from a wonderful trip through Europe. I'll share a couple of photos at the end for you if you're interested. But all the stats have just come in for the last month, so I'm going to jump right into all the detailed stats and bring you up to date on Vancouver's real estate market. So let's jump right into it. Here's the table showing all the activity and what's happening in the different product. So if we look at detached houses, the sales activity year over year is down from this time last year by about 14%. For houses, the benchmark price from this time last year is actually up about 1.8%. So that's good news. But over the summer, we've seen some pretty lateral movement on prices, staying where they are, no increases, no decreases, no surprise there for houses. And attached townhomes, if we look at the same thing, activity year over year is down about 12% on attached townhomes and duplexes. The benchmark price, we're almost the same. We're up just under 1% from this time last year. And last month, virtually no change. If we look at attached apartments and condos, activity's down about 20%, fairly significant from this time last year. No surprise over August. And the benchmark price is about the same and no change month to month for apartment condos as well. So virtually no change over the last couple of months over summer. We're going to start to see those prices climb as we head into fall, starting with this month in September. But prices did remain relatively stable over the summer. And let's look at what's going to be coming. And let's look in particular what's hot and what's not. Again, we're looking at our August stats. So these are the stats over our quietest month of the year after December. And what I look at in terms of determining how active a particular product is I look at the sales ratio. And as many of you subscribers know, if we're seeing less than 11%, we've entered into that buyer's market zone. It's keeping prices at bay. If we're between 12 and 20%, we're in a balanced market. We do see relatively healthy growth in prices in that range. But if we're over 21%, we enter into that seller's market territory where we're seeing upward pressure on prices. So again, all that sales ratio is the absorption rate of product into sales on a given monthly basis. So what percentage of the homes are selling in that last month? So that's all the sales ratio is, and that's the breakdown. That's how we determine how active it is. So let's look at houses on the west side. First of all, you can see how the sales ratio did change over the last year. And in July, we were at a balanced 13%. This past month, no surprise, we're at 7% sales ratio. So we are indeed in that buyer's market territory. Last month, for detached houses west side. And if we look at condos, townhomes west side, you can see last month we were just at that brink of the seller's market territory, pretty active prior to that. And this month, no surprise, we've dropped down to 17% in August, and we're in, of course, balanced market territory. If we look at condos and townhomes downtown, last month we were balanced. This month we are still at 11%, just on the brink of that buyer's market plateau for downtown. And if we look at houses on the east side, now we had some good activity last year in houses. It was in 13% balanced as we left you in July. And now this month we are, of course, at 8%. So very little activity took place last month. In August, again, that's cyclical in buyer's market territory for houses east side last month. Condos, townhomes on the east side, we were very busy. You can see we had some sales ratios in the high 20s. In spring, dropped down to 24 in July, and this month we're down to 19. So probably our most active product and area is condos and townhomes in the east side of Vancouver at 19%, but still in a balanced market range. Okay, so if we look at the whole west side, you can see most of the product is in that balanced market range for townhomes, condos, and detached for the west side, and that's the same on the east side, where we see some condos were just in that seller's market range, but are now just on that borderline. Okay, so if we look at all of BC, we're looking at the sales activity, how many sales took place. You can see the sales actually increased well into spring. This graph is probably from the end of May, June, showing that increased number of sales in all the different areas of BC. And then, of course, in summer, that slowed down. And if we look at the sales ratio for all of BC, again, this band here, you can see is the balanced market range. We're just in the middle to upper area in all of BC for the seller's ratio. You can see where we were in 2022. We can see how we jumped into that last year in all our product categories. So what's going to happen with prices? Well, let's look across BC what's happened. The average sale price did make a dip this year across BC and Greater Vancouver. If we look at the three product, you can see in houses, we did peak out and match that 2022 pricing. We actually surpassed it. And then we're seeing a little bit of a drop in average house price just over the summer months. That's the same with townhomes, and that's the same with condos. But relatively speaking, we're seeing a little bit of movement along with those prices. They do fluctuate around the peak right now, and we're certainly going to be back there and past that shortly. If you look at the housing price index by region, you can see it's been pretty consistent throughout all the areas of BC and Greater Vancouver as well. And I like to look at the 5-year trend of the housing price index. That's a good graph to look at because that takes a lot of the highs and lows out, and you can see where we were peaking a little bit earlier this year. We're pretty well stabilized over the summer months, and now you're going to start to see some growth in townhomes, houses, and condos as we enter that busy fall period. But again, for all intents and purposes, we're pretty well at that peak that we saw back in 2022. So we're at an all-time high in prices, just a little bit of drop over the summer, but that's going to be made back very quickly. So if we look at the burbs around us in the Lower Mainland, and we're looking at detached, you can see all the ones in red, we had a drop in activity. Again, no surprise over August. The anomaly here was West Vancouver, Delta, Tsawwassen, Cloverdale, and South Surrey. And if we look at attached properties, same thing. Overall activity is down pretty well everywhere except for West Vancouver and the Coquitlam area. So it's the same story pretty well throughout the Lower Mainland of activity over the summer. Now remember, all that pent-up demand from people not buying does build up, and when that starts to go, when people say, hey, these rates are low enough now, let's go out and make that purchase, it's going to take off and very, very quickly. So let's talk about the forecasting for the rest of the year and for spring of 2025. What's going to happen? Let's look at what's important. I look at the drivers. We look at in green, market enhancers, red are market deterrents, and in orange, we've got transitioning areas. We have a market enhancer now for consumer confidence and the buyer demand. They are concerned about what they're reading about the economy, but they're all prepared for that busy fall market. The inventory is there. There's enough product for them to choose. They're going to be out there looking. I'm already starting to get calls. So the consumer confidence is certainly back. And inflation, our economy is doing. There's questions there. If inflation continues to drop down to zero, we have another problem. But inflation is falling, and it's falling at a good, steady pace. And of course, the Bank of Canada is following suit with their adjustments, and I'll talk about that shortly. Now, the cost of borrowing is transitioning. It's still in the 4.6, 4.8 range for a 5-year fixed mortgage. That's the one most of us look at. But it is going to follow suit with the Bank of Canada rate. So that is transitioning towards green. And of course, the inventory levels are good. They're providing a good selection for people who are downsizing or upsizing. So everything looks green and everyone's ready to go. We just need to get that momentum started, and we'll see that this month. So, consumer confidence, there's the buyers. They're looking out of their dark caves. They're all excited because the sun's out, and they're going to start shopping. Retail sales are where they were last month. Unemployment rate, interestingly enough, BC's doing very well, holding steady at 5.5%. Canada's unemployment rate is increasing, interestingly enough, which is good because that gets the federal government, Bank of Canada, sort of getting on top of that. When the unemployment rate goes up, it's not a good sign. They want to get those overnight rates down to stimulate the economy. So BC overall is doing quite well there. And if we look at sort of that historical unemployment rate, here's where we are now at 5.5%. You can see we are pretty good compared to about the last, where do we go back to, 76. So we're almost 50 years back here. Look what happened in 85. Wow, we are at 15% unemployment. That was just before Expo, for those of you who were here for that. Very interesting time. So, anyways, I digress. Another consumer confidence data point that I look at is, of course, the rental rates. And the rental rates are increasing. They're actually, last month they were at $3 a square foot. Now we're almost at $3.50 a square foot. That's a 17% increase in rental rates. Now what that does is rents go up, people start looking at alternatives, and the best alternative to renting, of course, is buying. So this does stimulate people moving over to that real estate purchase side of the equation when rents start to climb like that. Construction starts. Under construction, we got a lot of product being built right now, and that's certainly going to feed the supply market, give people more product to purchase. That's a good thing. Year-to-date housing starts, of course, are a little lower than last year, but that will certainly catch up very shortly. Now, if we look at residential sales in BC, you can see that activity was pretty good in the beginning of the year. It dropped down, and then over summer it was just holding steady. Again, that we already know. Inflation, here's the real good news. What's happening? There's our friend Tiff Macklem holding the housing market in his hands back east. And inflation is now at 2.5%, and the Canada overnight target rate lowered again just a few days ago to 4.25%. That's great news. So that's an immediate benefit for the variable rate mortgage holders. And of course, if the bond market reacts with lower yields, then the fixed rates should also follow suit. And borrowers are getting enticed with the continued rate drops. They're getting excited. This is the third rate drop in a row. I anticipate probably another 50 basis points this fall. That's going to be good news. And maybe another 100 to 150 basis points next year. So we're going to start to see, all going as it is now, some really, really good rates coming up next year. So that's all good news from the inflation point of view. And if we look at the consumer price index, same as the inflation, you can see where we were. Remember, we were just touching that 8% mark when we were having that hyperinflation. We're down here, holding pretty steady and dropping, and that's the good news. That's what makes the Bank of Canada very happy. So that's kind of interesting. And there, I call this the Bank of Canada happiness band. That is between 2 and 3% for the consumer price index. We're well within that happiness band. They're happy. They lower that overnight rate, immediately impacts the variable rate mortgages, and depending on the bond market, we should see fixed rates fall suit in that as well. So all good news from an inflation and mortgage rate points of view. If we look at what's happening next door, of course, there we are at 2.5%. That's down from 2.7. Next door, they were at 2.89. They actually, they're at 2.89 now. They were at 2.97. So that's a drop in the U.S. inflation rate. So we are at 4.25 for our overnight target rate, and the U.S. target rate is just a little bit higher at 5.33%. So all good news on that front. I think the election over here is helping here, and of course, inflation here is certainly behaving, and that's making these guys very happy. So the Bank of Canada and the Fed need to continue to drop the overnight rate in order to ward off a recession and avoid inflation continuing to drop to zero. We've got to be very careful. It's a bit of a balancing act there. But I would suggest that we can expect continued rate cuts, like I said earlier, of up to 50 basis points. And the Bank of Canada really wants to get to its neutral range, which is between 2.25 and 3.25% next year. So if we're at 4.25, we're looking at another 100 to 200 basis points drop on the overnight rate. So that's certainly where we're hoping to go. That looks like where we're headed, and everybody's carefully maneuvering towards that goal. So that's inflation. Now, if we look at the cost of borrowing, again, the rates are falling at a steady rate, variable rate immediately, fixed rate's going to hold steady until the rates drop a little bit further. And there's the graph showing what's happened with the rates and where we are now, variable and fixed. So all good news on the mortgage front, and you can see there's sort of a historical graph going back much further showing where the rates were, how they dropped down. This is when we were around 2%. That was the glory days. And then what happened over the last 18 months, and now we're starting to see that recovery. So that's an interesting historical graph of the mortgage rates. Now, I like to look at the buying power, and I call it for today's cats. We all love cats. Cats are a company, part of our company logo. Stephanie made up this great PDF of the cat holding up the cash for the buying power. So what I look at is what does it cost to borrow $100,000? And if we're looking at a great 5-year rate of 4.95%, you take a 25-year amortization and you're paying monthly, that would equate to a monthly cost of $560. So for every $100,000 borrowed, you can plan to spend about $560. So that is going to start to drop. If you're spending $1 million, $5,600 a month. So you can use that as a factor when you're calculating different product, when you're looking at different prices. So that's the buying power calculation. Inventory levels. Now, if we're looking at detached houses west side, we're at about 630 homes out there right now. We're going to see that climb over September. All of these will climb. Condos and townhomes, we're at 918 homes on the market on the west side. On the east side for houses, we're down to 551 homes. And for condos and townhomes, we're down to 581 homes. Again, good inventory selection, that is going to start increasing. Across Greater Vancouver, you can see here is the 10-year historical average for listings, and here's where we are now. We're pretty good when you look at an overall range, and this is the historical min-max. We're right about where we should be. Decent selection for product out there across Greater Vancouver. Across BC, active listings are climbing throughout the province. That's good news. And active listings in the various areas. Again, we've had a few drops over the summer, but that's going to start climbing as we hit the next few weeks in September. So, what's next for prices? This is why you're all watching the video. What's going to happen? Okay, so if we look at units sold, we can see we had some good activity this year, and then it tapered off in Greater Vancouver through the summer. That you already know. If we look at the sales forecast predicted versus actuals, this is the forecast of the activity that we're looking at, that bump in September, October. Of course, November, December, it gets a little quiet, and here is the actual of what's happening. So, and that's up to the end of June. So we're going to see some increased activity, of course, as we expect going into September and October. This is really interesting. It's a graph showing how reactive the market is to interest rates. So if we look here, January 2023, we can see the unit sales being relatively low when after the end of when the Bank of Canada began raising the rates. As soon as they started raising them in February 2022, you can see that activity dropped down dramatically. They paused, and then all of a sudden the market started to react positively. They began again in June of 2023 to increase rates, and immediately following the market dropped, and we had a little bit of fluctuation here and some recovery. And as soon as the first Bank of Canada rate cut took place in June, you can see that market activity just take off. It just shows how responsive the market is to those mortgage rates. And the Bank of Canada, knowing that the rates will fall. So that's kind of interesting. So we're going to see that activity increase as we head into fall because the rates are falling. It does not look like there's any end in sight at this point for that path to stop where it is. It's going to continue. We're going to see those rates come down, and that's going to continue that activity through September, October, and into November. So that's what we are looking at. Next year, we're looking at increased activity as we head into 2025. This year, we had more activity than last year, so that's going to be good news overall home sales across BC. And in conclusion, if you look at what's important, we know that our market is directly impacted by mortgage rates, by inventory, and consumer demand. Those are the three main factors. There's hundreds of others, but those are the main three factors that influence our market the most. We know inflation is falling. It's doing really well. Big check mark there. We know the Bank of Canada is going to continue to drop their rates well into 2025, so that's a check mark. And we know the inventory is good now, and it's going to increase over the next month or two, so we're going to see really good selection out there. So three big check marks, that's good. So in conclusion, the rates will continue to fall well into 2025. The lower rates, of course, will attract more buyers into the market, and it will allow those sellers with those great rates that they had secured a couple years ago to take advantage of moving up into the market, and in their blended rates to not be freaked out because they were much higher than they were comfortable with. Now they're getting down to that range of reason. And the lower the rates drop, the more sellers and buyers are going to jump back into the market. So that's good news. And that pent-up demand that takes place over a period just like over July and August, where people aren't buying, that demand continues to build behind the dam, and once the floodgates open and buyers start coming out, the market gets hyperactive again. So the tightening policy that the Bank of Canada did to combat that high inflation has now changed, and they're in that easing policy, which again will positively impact the market. And I expect home sales to increase with the momentum carried right through into 2025. And you're going to see prices follow suit. As the market gets busier and busier, you're going to see the prices continue to grow with that as well. So the Bank of Canada does have to aggressively continue with the overnight drops in order to avoid a recession. And the next 60 days in our market period here in Greater Vancouver will be the busiest window this fall, with rates falling and consumers becoming more active. My prediction, I think we're going to see at least a 2% increase over this fall and 3 to 5% in 2025. I'll come back and visit those as those numbers fall out, but that's where we stand right now. So let's go to a fun page. I just got back from a great European vacation. That is my cousin Donald and his wife Irena in Vienna, Austria. We had a great visit with them. We were able to visit, of course, that's the Glorietta behind Schönbrunn in Vienna. Beautiful, and that's inside the castle. Fantastic colors and paintings and history. Just loved Vienna. And then, of course, we spent some time in Croatia. I have never been in Croatia, but oh my God, the water is clear. I've never seen visibility like that. You can swim and dive and you can see forever, and it's warm, 28 degrees. Outside temperatures, 28, 29, up to 35, and the water is 28 degrees. It's bathtub water. Unbelievable. So Croatia was beautiful. That's Dubrovnik. If you've never been in Dubrovnik, highly recommend it in Croatia. It's a 1,000-year-old town. Beautiful big castle wall around the city. There's a shot of the city from the cable car that takes you on top of a mountain, and there's where we stayed. I found a great Airbnb at the end of Dubrovnik towards the castle wall there, and there's the inner harbor where you can take ferries. There's the island of Lokrum. You can visit that. There's lots of great swimming, and in the other side of the town they have these bars on the rocks, and you could jump in the water and go swimming, come back, have a margarita. Really, really cool city, Dubrovnik. And near Dubrovnik, you can go on what they call the Blue Caves. So you can go on a boat tour. They drop you off outside. You swim in through this entry hole, and inside it opens up like a theater, and it's all light blue. Super, super cool. And of course, Dubrovnik itself has hundreds of these great classic narrow lanes, 2 restaurants every block. Great shopping. Really, really recommend it. Sorry, I got a little bit excited because it was an awesome trip. I wanted to share a couple of photos with you. That is my September 2024 update. You can watch this video on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram. And of course, we have the podcasts on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. I'm Marty Pospisil. I wanted to thank you very much for joining me for my market update. I hope to see you next month, and please invite your friends to subscribe. And if you have any questions on anything, I always appreciate getting your emails there on the market, and I'm happy to get back to you. You take care. Have a wonderful September.